Hello guys, Professor O'Brien again with a very, very quick lecture this time, mostly because we have seen this material several times before in this class, and this is just a reminder with some examples. Don't think, however, I'm telling you not to do this chapter. This is well worth doing again because I know there are several of you who are still unsure, for instance, about the difference between active and passive. And this is McGraw-Hill, chapter 46, the chapter entitled Active Verbs. And I think there are two major messages in this chapter. Number one, active verbs in the more common use of that word. Action. That is to say, you should be seeking out verbs that encode action. And sometimes you may be hiding that action by turning the verbs in needlessly into participles or even nouns where no action is possible. But secondly, we're using the word active in the grammatical sense to speak about the difference between active voice and passive voice. And we'll talk about that when we come to it. In the meantime, look at the two notes in the colored box at the top of page 697 and don't ignore them. We're particularly looking at weak uses of the verb to be here when you're seeing John is eating instead of John eats or similar. Grammar checkers can't check for this. Grammarly, for all the advertising, can't check for this. You've got to be your own checker. And this is, by the way, one of the skills that proofreaders develop. They can smell out poorly used verbs or excessive use of the verb to be. Secondly, grammar checkers will often find passive voice, but number one, they'll sometimes be wrong because it's a complicated enough structure, and computers will sometimes flag what they think are combinations of words that aren't actually passive at all. Or secondly, the fix they suggest makes the sentence worse. Again, if your word processor or your grammar checker flags the passive voice, read the sentence first. Don't just accept the fix. You might end up with gibberish. Read the sentence and ask yourself, how can I change this? Okay, 46a, to my mind, the most important part of this chapter. Consider alternatives to some be verbs. Now, they provide two examples of be verbs there. Germany is relatively poor in natural resources, and decent health care is a necessity, not a luxury. These are fine. And they're just being provided there as examples of how the verb to be can normally be used in a sentence. But what's to stop you saying Germany lacks natural resources? That's got zip. Or we need decent health care. How about that? However, I'm not saying remove every form of the verb to be that you find in your texts. 1/8 of every word used in English is a form of the verb to be. It's a necessary component of the English language, particularly because it's often used as an auxiliary. John drinks, John is drinking, John will be drinking, John was drinking. You cannot extinguish all of these uses. Do exercise 46.1. I think it will direct your attention to overuse of the verb to be and how you might be able to fix that problem. Now, 46b is the second portion of this chapter. Prefer the active voice, it says, and there's a reason for this. The passive voice hides the doer of the action. 3 soldiers were killed yesterday in Iran. Who killed them? We don't know. The passive voice hides the doer. Now, you'll often find the passive voice being used by politicians, businessmen, and newsreaders. All three of these groups will occasionally have reason to use the passive voice. Politicians, because they don't want to take the blame. Businessmen, same reason. Newsreaders, because often it's not clear who did the bombing, who did the robbery, whatever it might be. Can you identify the passive voice? We've spoken about it several times, and I'm here to tell you once again, it's easily spotted. It's always some form of the verb to be plus the past participle of the verb. And as I jokingly suggested in previous iterations, previous units, it's passive typically if you can end the sentence with the phrase by zombies. Johnny was eaten by zombies. The tree was knocked down by zombies. The 3 soldiers were killed in Iraq yesterday by zombies. You get the idea. It's a playful way of explaining the passive voice. But don't use by zombies. Use the verb to be plus past participle as your marker of the passive voice. Now, you'll frequently find it quite fairly used in scientific papers where the writers are avoiding inserting themselves. After the bacteria were isolated, they were treated carefully with nicotine, etc. The experimenter probably shouldn't be included in that passage. It may sound a bit stilted, but it's often necessary for scientific writing. Those are the main points of this chapter, honestly. Please do exercise 46.2 because it will make you aware of passive voices, and you will hopefully be able to repair the examples there from passive to active. Exercise 46.3 is an excellent roundup of this chapter. I would normally have you do this in small groups in class, but here we are. See if you can minimize the use of the passive voice, and particularly the be verb. Now, just to bring you back to to section 46A of this chapter, seeking active verbs often makes you think of another concept that I've been pushing very heavily over the course, and that is power words. Frequently, not just students, but particularly students, use the verb to be in some sort of a weak adjective or weak participle instead of seeking a good verb. Johnny was angry at the absence of apples in the student dining hall. Is there some other way of saying that? Johnny bristled at the absence of apples in the student's dining hall, whatever it might be. Think about how you can get away from this overused verb to be plus adjective or participle. So you have the idea. There, I'm going to leave things because otherwise I am going to start wittering.